A very good evening to all the viewers. Today we have with us Dr. Ruth, who is Senior Director for Economic, Youth and Sustainability at the Commonwealth Secretariat. The Commonwealth, as we all know, is an intergovernmental organization of 56 nations. A very warm welcome to you, Dr. Ruth.
Good afternoon to everyone.
So, how are you, Dr. Ruth?
I'm very well, thank you, from a rainy London.
That's the typical English weather.
It's also a very busy week for us because this week is the finalization of the conversations with our member countries with regard to the communique that would be presented at the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting in October in Samoa in the Pacific, because this is the year of CHOGM. It's Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting, in short, is called CHOGM. So we now have 56 countries here working through the documents to finalize it. Then it goes to the heads to be uh, mandated and agreed on for the next couple of years of the work and what we do as an intergovernmental organization to progress on resilient economies, resilient islands, and resilient prosperity for our small states.
So, Dr. Roth, my first question to you would be that these days we all focus on sustainable development goals, on climate change mitigation, and yet year after year we witness indictments, we witness damning reports that there are record breaking hot years and there are islands that are on the brink of drowning, and the ecological destruction is rampant. So, what do you think needs to be done to inculcate this spirit of call to action? And now we have all these technologies, all these data, all these visualization at our disposal. So, how do we bring all of this together, and how do we basically spearhead this sense of urgency among nations, among organizations, and among groupings?
Thank you, Aditya. This for me, I was 10 years old when I had this defining moment when I said, I want to save our planet. And I was 10 years old a long time ago. But sadly, we're here now and we are still dragging our feet. That is the sadness of it. And the science, we have been speaking about the science, and some of the research I have been doing in the last 20 odd years, where we have been constantly saying that what climate change will result in is the intensity and the frequency of extreme weather events, which is all in either way, both ways related to water, either droughts or excess water. And this year in particular, I want us to think about it because this year in particular, the fact that the Caribbean had a hurricane as early as July is unprecedented. And that is because the oceans are warming up faster, earlier than they used to. So we as human beings have been contributing, but with our own um, short sightedness. We're not doing it deliberately, but it's our short sightedness in not trying to understand the planet that we are in and that the lives that it will affect not only my generation, but your generation, Aditya, and your children's generation. We've already done the damage. And hence, for instance, last year the UN Secretary General said, and I quote, he said, we have entered the era of burning. And that's a very accurate description. And hence, we have to really accelerate our commitments and our action, not only commitments in word, but in action. The time for talk is past. Time for action is important. But at the same time, we also know that there is opportunity. We as human beings are very dynamic. We are scientific human beings. We are also economic. We also have social beings. And hence, we are also dynamic in trying to find solutions. So, right now, I think the great opportunity we have is that we have relevant technology to understand things better We get the science to show the evidence of these changes. Apart from all the knowledge, the media is able to report about these extreme events happening in every corner of the world, which sometimes we didn't have awareness of it when we didn't have media, reporting it in such a live ways as well. So we have these technologies to know the realities. For instance, even in terms of people's skepticism, and I've done this research more than 10 years ago to try to see the perception changing in people, because when they're seeing these extreme events, they're beginning to believe in it, which they didn't believe in when we simply talked about the research and the science before. So we have evidence all around us, and we see people suffering. We thought COVID was brought us to a standstill and showed how interconnected we are as a world. But actually, climate change was already telling us before COVID that we are one interconnected, and I use the phrase digital world. And that's why we have digital technologies and geospatial technologies. I will give you examples of how the Commonwealth Secretariat, a flagship program that the Commonwealth Secretariat has, is called the Commonwealth Climate Finance Access Hub. What we do is we embed our advisors in country governments to work with governments to identify the priorities for their adaptation and mitigation plans so that they can meet, not only save the countries, but also meet their nationally determined climate contributions, which were agreed in the Paris Agreement and which keep getting ratified every time. Plus, we had the global stocktake in 2023. Please stop me if I'm using too much jargon because I don't know your viewers. So tell me to simplify if
That's
my
fine. That's totally fine.
Okay, so what happened is that now so what we do with our Climate Finance Access Hub is we work with our member countries, many of them small and vulnerable and who need the support the most, to then enable them to access the global climate finance, which is there, which is even to access that, sometimes the countries need the technical assistance and capacity building. So through that, we've been able to support countries to a large extent to support the needs they have, but nothing is adequate. There is always more that needs doing. And using geospatial data or satellite data, we have examples in, say, 3 Pacific countries such as Fiji, Vanuatu, and Solomon Islands, where we have worked very closely with other partners as well, where we can use satellite data to understand the vulnerabilities that these countries are going through to climate change. And we use that to even strengthen their proposals seeking climate finance. And so that's one way of using technology. But there is other ways, including in making countries, saving countries before the damage happens, or saving people before the lives of people before the damage happens. And I think that sort of systems, Earth observation, early warning systems to scale up and accelerate those and use them efficiently so that we don't have the large scale human lives being lost. And this is where we have space technology for that as well. And it is being rapidly sort of becoming public as well. I was at a conference on climate change and space, which is the first conference of that kind which happened last year, where we had NASA and we had European Space Agency and all the agencies coming together, where in the past, when we didn't know, when we were still in the early stages of exploration of space, what we were doing was we needed to protect the data. But then now, once the science is understood and progressed, we're able to, NASA was also releasing its data, and it's all public good. So it's released data is available publicly to be able to at a free at no cost or very little cost. So that's because of the importance of having that data to be made available. If I may say, while I'm on the topic of data, is, as you're aware, some of the small islands are the most vulnerable and they have
Exactly.
an existential threat because of the climate issues. So there was recently the UN Small Island Developing States Conference. It happens once in 10 years. The fourth UN SITS, as it is called, happened in Antigua and Bermuda, chaired it this year, and the next one will be 10 years later. And one of the most important outcomes of that was the creation of centers of excellence as well as developing data hubs of countries. And to do that, today we have systems, we have technology, including space technology, which even though countries may have their own data, the issues with that data is they're not visible as a global phenomenon or in the global context. So that if you look at sometimes I've used the phrase that when you look at when you look at the data sets or when you try to find the information, some of the small islands are little spots, or I call them little gems in our oceans. But to get the data, to understand the data, especially the geospatial data, the technology is going to be a big enabler for that. And the more we understand these things, the more data we have, the more evidence we have, it'll help us understand, and through that, help us to solve the problems that we have.
Dr. Ruth, as you mentioned about the small island developing states and the least developed countries being most vulnerable to climate change, to changing weather patterns, and basically they are the ones on the front lines as well as bearing the brunt of these changes, and it is having a cascading effect in their societies, in their economies. So this reminds me that around a decade back, you devised something called the Universal Vulnerability Index, and you also worked in the formation of multi-dimensional vulnerability index. So could you please tell us something more about these two indexes and how they help us in identifying and spotting the various gradations of vulnerabilities in all the regions of the world?
Thank you, Aditya. So the Commonwealth used to do economic vulnerability index in the past. But in 2020, when I had the responsibility for doing the economic vulnerability index, I said we are in 2020. I'm not going to do economic vulnerability index. So what I meant by that was we have to design it so that it looks into various aspects of the vulnerabilities, and hence the design. I designed it to have economic vulnerability, climate vulnerability, as well as geopolitical vulnerability. So the index actually covers, it's a comprehensive in the sense of looking at considering all the variables. Now, there is always the data. So this is where data then enrich these indices that we find. But the purpose of this index is not simply to understand, but also then to work on finding solutions to help countries be protected, or to get the benefits and what they need to be able to adapt and mitigate. And one of the aspects of that is, of course, financing. Yes, in terms of access to development finance as well as climate finance. Now we separate the two to make it more clearly to understand the needs better. Because what happens, there's another element which happens is that when climate disasters strike or any other, even economic challenges such as COVID happen, the countries are forced to take debt, and which means the debt burden on countries increases as well. So the whole economic, and of course there are lots of social consequences as well. These are severely impacted, and hence the universal vulnerability is contributing to the debate about, as well as supporting agencies and organizations which then provide this access to countries or finances to countries, to ensure that they factor in an understanding of the evaluating the vulnerabilities of countries, and accordingly provide adequate access to much needed finance for these countries. Now the MVI was the one we set out was in 2021, and then UN's MVI has been in the process since that time, and we have worked very closely and collaboratively with the UN, sharing us, so they recognize ours as having been inputted into the MVI. So all these indices, I would say, are meant to help our countries at the end of the day, for us as a world to understand vulnerabilities. So having a menu of these indices is to improve our understanding, and through that provide the support that countries need, whether it's financial, whether it's technology. What is it that we can share and support so that the people, we are one world population, we as the people, lives are saved and protected.
That's very true, Dr. Ruth, especially considering the fact that we stand today at a threshold of transition as well as disruption. So we need to transition our energy systems, our food systems, our agricultural production. And at the same time, we are basically wrangling with the disruptive forces of AI, of automation. So, which brings my next question: how to strike a harmonious chord between these forces of disruption and the inevitable transition that is happening for the benefit of the global population?
So every innovation has a component of a disruption. In some ways, if you think about disruption as a positive force, it generates innovation. Yes, any kind of disruption then gives rise to innovation. So, and every technology, every innovative science has had a disruptive element to it, whether it's nuclear energy or anything in this world. But we as a people, how can we commit ourselves to ensure that there are elements or forces and groups who engage in disruption? These are human dynamism. You cannot, how do we encourage that or incentivize that, right, to not happen? One way, of course, is to ensure that we focus on the advantages, the benefits. That requires motivation, that requires commitment. That is something we should be teaching our children right from when they're children, so that when they grow up, they choose the right path, because we as human beings also have a choice, and we are the owner of that choice. Nobody can, the choice is entirely an individual human being's choice, what they want to do, how they want to do. So to what can we do as a world to ensure that we commit to progress, to the good of any technology or innovation? That's one thing we do. But and then when there are forces which you cannot stop, then we look at regulation. For instance, we have to ensure that we have right regulatory frameworks to protect from negative disruptions. And my if I talk like an agony aunt, my agony is that sometimes we are too late in trying to bring in regulation. My wish is that I wish we can put regulation in place from the beginning before the damage is done. So we should be proactive and ahead of the negative disruptions happening, to put the regulation in place so that they will totally disincentivize people who are creating a disruptive environment. And this will happen to everything, but at the end of the day, I was a professor of computer science in India. Yes, may long time ago. We were part of my group. My guru was part of the foundation of computer benefits of computer science in India. By the thousands of students we taught and guided, and the research we were doing, who are now all over the world. Now, the idea of that was, the whole thing is about the advantage of it. The advantages of technology, the benefits of technology are extremely valuable to us, and we will have to. This will help us also in reducing our energy emissions, for example. At the same time, my most recent agony, I'm using agony aunt phrase here now, is that we now know that even electronic footprint is carbon intensive. Yes.
Oh, yes.
So how do we, each individual, so we have public policies, we have private sector which also is involved in it, which also has to act on it, but we also as individuals have to take responsibility for it. To what extent are we measuring our carbon footprint and reacting or behaving or making choices which will help us in, or make us as individuals also, to reduce our carbon footprint? This is why I've been sort of stressing my team saying don't make so many copies even electronically. Yeah, even attachments and emails, they're carbon intensive. Yes, they have a carbon footprint. So we should be thinking about these things in our daily lives, in everything that we do and we practice.
Dr. Ruth, you raised a very valid point about regulations, about frameworks, about inserting guardrails, especially with regards to upcoming technologies such as AI. But one conundrum that we often face is that the exponential pace of technology advancement is so vast, so huge that frameworks are not able to catch up with them. So, how do we bridge that divide, that gap, so that the frameworks are consonant with technology evolution and they are not rendered obsolete?
So I talked about disincent is incentivizing. I mean, I talked about the framework of disincentivizing this negative disruption. But let me, and the question you raised made me think, as in how do we do this? And in a way, while we think that you have to enable companies, organizations, these are, it ranges from jugaad to small, entrepreneurs playing with technology in kids. It could be any age because technology is something which the talent can come from anywhere. Now, there should be systems even at that developing innovation stage, which then highlight the importance of not simply doing something just because it's very interesting, but before it is deployed, before it is let loose into the market, there has to be mechanisms which are put in place right from the beginning. Whoever the innovator is, whatever level, whether it's small, medium, or large, how can they be incentivized? So you can incentivize people not to be driven by profit motive alone, but to think about the sustainability of people. Yes. And this can be done in multiple ways. I mean, you can incentivize them. Sometimes it could be that somebody's intellectual curiosity makes them do certain things. But even so, even that, then there has to be mechanisms right at the formation or creation of that innovation to say, yes, maybe this is an interesting technology, but one has to think about what are the dangers that it may cause. So we have to put some machinery mechanisms into place right at the beginning. Then we see lots of movies about how people do some disruptive things too. But the point is that that may be so, but we have to have all of us coming together. We have to apart from frameworks, it's about, we have to have these conversations. They have to happen at all levels, at public, private. They have to have happen at the third sector community level, where the agony for me is that we realize things after damage is done. For me as a child, what I remember, what I learned in school was prevention is better than cure. So, how can we put in mechanisms which prevent the problems? And this is where everybody has to come together and they have to think of the world and our communities at a larger than self individual profit and individual gain alone, whether intentionally or sometimes with lack of insight or unintentionally.
So, with all this data and technology, Dr. Ruth, what we need is a community driven, participative, inclusive approach that brings all the stakeholders together in this intersectional system of systems. Is that something that we should aspire for?
Definitely. Hats off to you, Aditya. That's a very valid way of putting it.
So, Dr. Ruth, but again, like you say, that these problems they have been identified, but there are various dissonances, various gaps between local governments and national governments, between two governments, between you can say different organizations. So there are silos at different levels. So how do we break those silos and how do we basically hammer in the point about immediacy of this? And after this, like You are also an expert in youth and demography. So these issues are basically existential for the youth because they are directly related to employment, to economic development, to growth, to opportunities, and they are also influencing the patterns of migration, of people moving from one country to other, of conflict, of crisis. So how to bell the cat basically?
Yes, as a professor, young people and their lives, it's been my mission all my life, enabling young people achieve their potential. And I would say this generation are in many ways a most privileged generation, but at the same time, they also have a very complex world that we are in. While there's a lot of opportunity and privilege, there's also severe challenges. But I would say the opportunities and privileges outweigh the challenges that we have if we come together, if we commit to. And young people should be at the table. This is something we're pushing for in every forum, having young people at the table as well so that they are engaged with the problems that exist. And also, they also are at the table to be the leaders, with the future leaders together, learning together from experiences to the shoulders that we have. We want them to climb on those shoulders to make a better world for themselves, right? And for that, they also have to take responsibility and action. They also have to understand every action has an equal and opposite reaction. While I'm using a physics phrase, it is true about every decision one makes, every social engagement that one has. If only one can think about how every action that one takes, what are the consequences of that action, we would be we would be in a better place. Yes. And some things are, of course, sometimes that some problems you feel you hit a brick wall. Why is that a brick wall? Not because there is a wall there, because there are some people creating that brick wall, but they're still people too. If they also chose not to be a barrier, but to be an enabler, then, this would be heaven on earth.
So, Dr. Ruth, as you very rightly mentioned, the need to break barriers and basically the need for people to realize and recognize the repercussions beforehand. The Commonwealth Secretariat recently signed an MOU with the government of Azerbaijan for climate action in small island developing states, particularly in Tonga. So, could you please shed some more light on that?
Sure, Aditya. So as you know, Azerbaijan is the president for COP29, and Azerbaijan is also thinking about how best to what is its contribution going to be, and and one of the things that Azerbaijan has been keen with the collaboration with Commonwealth Secretariat is in the context of our small island developing states, because knowing that the Commonwealth Secretariat has been a key institution which has been working and advocating and enabling the issues of SIDS, small island states, for 40 years or so, from the beginning, when to give them a voice and give them a voice at the table. And then, of course, over the years, SIDS are being heard more than they used to be, even say 15 years ago. So with Azerbaijan, so Azerbaijan was key. So we've been talking with us, collaborating with Azerbaijan as to what can we do together, which would where we could highlight and move things on some actions at COP. And Azerbaijan rightly found the biggest strength, the key thing that they would be supporting for Azerbaijan is Commonwealth's work on SIDS. And then with Azerbaijan, last year at COP28, I saw how I went into Azerbaijan's their pavilion, and they had a lot of space. They have good, they're scientifically, they have a good space technology. I know Indian space is the lowest cost space science in the world, and I wanted to be a space scientist at one time when I was growing up in India. But so I think ISRO is an excellent program. At the same time, I was trying to think about which are the countries or organizations that we can collaborate with
Mhm.
in order to use space technology, understand the data, and train countries efficiently to support countries to with their resilience and sustainable development. So when I was talking to colleagues in Azerbaijan, I said, look, in this collaboration, we can also work with Azerbaijan's space agency to be a partner to in this journey that we also have a priority for. And so Azerbaijan was actually quite interested in that, and so we're going to be collaborating with the Azer Cosmos, which is their
Space
space
agency.
agency, within this program, where we will be involving developing the data, providing some training programs for countries, particularly small island states, in the utilization of technology, available technology at its best, in the best possible way, toward this pursuing a journey of resilience against all kinds of vulnerabilities that countries face.
Dr. Ruth, there is a race among countries to develop digital twins, especially among these island states, be it Tuvalu, be it Grenada, because these countries, the threat that they face is, if they don't exist, then at least all of their information, their data, their oral histories, and all of the social fabric should be somewhere safe for future generations, for the posterity. So, how critical do you think is digital twin in advancing resilience, in advancing sustainable development goals? And are you at Commonwealth working on supporting digital twins somewhere?
So, Aditya, I think in a world where we have the technology to create digital data, digitization of data is important, and we have to find a way of also ensuring that the data is not wiped out in any way. The existence of the data is also important for us to know. Creating digital data makes operability much easier. For example, the Common Secretariat, we have something called the Virtual Center for Small States. It's a platform we are trying to create as a virtual space for, a platform where it's a collaborative workspace, safe space. Like we have so many of this. Like, look, the recording that you're doing, this is fantastic. I've never come across StreamYard before, but I love it. So, in that sense, it helps us to talk. I don't have to travel there. You don't have to travel here. We are saving some energy, carbon emissions as well in that process, and it works so much better. So we have to create that digital data, which increases our efficiency, carbon efficiency, and reduces carbon emissions. And having data is also extremely important for understanding things and finding solutions. But at the same time, I'm also not sure about the longevity of our digital data, even iCloud. We don't know the permanence of that iCloud yet because science is still in its infancy. So that's another thing science and innovation has to do, saying, do we know how long these digital data is going to survive for? For example, if archaeology is fascinating to me because suddenly you dig something and you find physical, even papers, which are preserved over centuries. So in that sense, we can't use that much paper, but we have new technologies to make it more efficient. But at the same time, we also have to think about what is the how are we going to preserve that data as well. That is still in its infancy, I think.
So we would need to figure out what is the shelf life of all of the reams and reams of data that we have compiled somewhere in
Exactly.
data center.
And all those photographs we are saving in iCloud, I don't know how long they're going to stay. I'm joking.
That is very true, actually. So, Dr. Ruth, there is something very important that you raised. about the world coming together and recognizing the impact. So we see in India recently there were floods, there were landslides in Kerala, in Greece there are wildfires, in California there are droughts, in Spain the vineyards are not able to raise their production because of this weather. So naturally, this is having some impact on cultivation patterns, on food patterns, and then we have data which is open now, open source from Landsat, from Sentinels, but still these issues like they are recurring and they are prolonging every year. So as someone who has been into the thick of policy making, into research, what is your prescription?
I wish I knew the answer. Let me make an attempt. I was watching a program yesterday briefly while I was doing some work called Earth, which goes back to 4 billion years when Earth didn't exist in the form that it is now. There was no life, there was no vegetation. It was it was it was volcanoes producing what it did. So this is the thing. There's this dynamism, I believe, in creation. There's something that is probably comes from faith that there is something beyond our human endeavors that is also overseeing us as human beings and values us as human beings. And this is also where we as human beings also have this dynamism. We are created with that, intellect and dynamism to evolve. These changes are happening, but at the same time we are constantly finding solutions, we're constantly innovating. For example, I'll give you a simple example. Japan now has a tourism element by which you don't need to carry your suitcases when you get off at the airport. You can choose whatever you want to use and leave them behind there for the time you're in the country. This is in some ways, so we're all constantly, because we are creators, like our creator who's created us, we have a mechanism by which we're constantly innovating, finding solutions. That is the way forward. We'll have to do that. The challenges will remain, but how do we overcome those challenges and find solutions that are fit for purpose for the times we are in now? But at the center of it is that we have to play our part and take the responsibility to not make our earth burn, but preserve it. We should contribute in our best way possible to do what we can to be the guardians of our earth, rather than being so wrapped up in us, our own selves as individuals, that we contribute to damaging our planet and our people, rather than preserving and sustaining and keeping the world resilient. So we have, I mean, we have the science and we innovate as well, and we will be able to find solutions, and we will be able to evolve, and we have to work with our earth, because even in this program called Earth, the earth has its own life. The plants have their life too. The animals have their life. The uh, biodiversity has life. So that's a living being too, like we are living. How do we coexist? It's This is where, for example, the now we talk more about indigenous people. These are the people who understand. They understand how our earth breathes, how our wind is life, our rain is life. So how do we work together as an entire ecosystem? Our space is part of our life too, right? How do we bring them all together so that we are all working toward preserving life and sustaining life, rather than contributing to damage it?
Very beautifully expressed, Dr. Roth, and this brings to my mind the Gaia hypothesis of James Lovelock, that Earth is basically a self regulating living organism. It's an organism, a big, big organism, and it has the capacity, it has the tendency to regulate itself, provided we do not tinker too much with it. We do not destroy it haphazardly. So that was a very beautiful food for thought. And anything else, Dr. Ruth, that you would like to add?
Thank you, Aditya. It's been a pleasure talking to you. I think sometimes by the questions you've made me think, and I've enjoyed that as well. And I hope whoever is watching this takes a little bit of that story and takes the responsibility to play their part to preserve our life and our planet and our people, and makes that their choice and commitment all their life.
Thank you so much, Dr. Roth, for your time and for the very insightful responses. It was a real pleasure talking to you and getting to know your views on a wide range of topics. Have a great day ahead.
Thank you, Aditya. You too. Take care.
Thank you so much.